Let's start with the logistics. Do you have any doubts that this will get passed, and when do you think it'll get passed in the House?
No doubts whatsoever. Tomorrow morning, last night, our distinguished Majority Leader, Mr. Hoyer, gave notice to members when the Senate bill passed that we would be coming to the floor on Friday morning. We have to give 24 hours notice of bringing a bill to the floor. And so that will be Friday morning, and it will be a lively, a wonderful debate. We're very proud of the legislation. We'll have a strong bipartisan vote, and hopefully by noon we'll be finished. That will only depend on how carefully we have to come in small numbers to the floor of the House to vote. But our debate will be finished, and we're very proud of it. We're very proud of the legislation because we believe that many elements of the House Democratic bill were contained in the Senate bill. It helped support the Senate Democrats who really, we did jujitsu on the Republican bill. It was very corporate-oriented. This is worker-focused. And so we're very pleased with that.
And Madam Speaker,
just to change the leverage,
As you know, Madam Speaker, there was a lot of impatience to get this done. When we thought we had it, we didn't have it. But it was held up for some of those issues that you're talking about that makes you prouder than you otherwise would have been. What's the most number one thing or two things that really you think improved because of the delay of a couple of days?
Well, let me just say it wasn't held up and it wasn't a delay. We saw a $2 trillion bill last Saturday. This is the legislative process. We have to see what it is and see how we can weigh in to get a compromise that works for the American people. So we actually should have been doing this over a much longer period of time where we'd have more transparency and the public could be more aware of the provisions in the bill. So this was a very accelerated pace as it was. But what we needed to do was to change it from corporate trickle down to worker bubble up. And in that way, it said that we do recognize that certain industries are going to need federal funds, and we want those industries to know that there are conditions to make sure that workers are protected, that they stay employed, that they're on the payroll, and that their rights are protected. It's very important. Strong infusion of funds for small business. We're very excited about that, and that is for the first time some grants in small business administration, and that process facilitated greatly to aid small businesses, which are, as you know, the lifeblood of our economy, the job creators, the wealth creators, so very, very important. So again, many of these changes that changed it from trickle down to bubble up took a matter of 48 or so hours. But that would not be called a delay. That would be called an improvement.
Fair enough. Let's talk about small businesses for a moment, because as you say, they really employ a lot of the people in the country. We've seen a lot of layoffs already at things like restaurants and things. How confident are you that that money can get to those small businesses? Larger businesses have more capital. They can tide it over and keep people on payroll. Smaller ones can't. Small Business Administration, are they up to that task?
Well, I just actually this morning spoke with the Secretary of the Treasury, Mr. Mnuchin, and we have been talking about this for a while, that we cannot leave it up to the process of the SBA. There's an initiative that he put forward that the banks could do the direct lending with the imprimatur of the SBA, and that would make this all go very much faster. And that will be a vast improvement, really necessary because of the urgency of getting those funds into the hands of the small businesses. And actually, there's also a loan forgiveness in there in terms of rent and utilities and the rest, depending on how a business thrives with the resources that they receive in a loan.
You mentioned also the oversight that's now in this bill, as I understand it, for some of the disbursements to the larger corporations. Some might call it a bailout. Is that oversight after the fact, or will it be advanced consultation so they'll be able to say, no, it shouldn't be going to that company, or do you have to wait for it to go out and then afterwards remonstrate with them?
Well, there are a couple different categories. For example, the airline industry has a very direct formula that part of the money, nearly 50-50, but part of the money goes in loans to the airlines, and part of it goes in grants because that goes directly to the employees, and that is the condition there. This money just touches base there, but goes directly to the employees to keep them employed. And then the other funds do have their conditions about no buybacks, no dividends, no bonuses, all of that kind of provisions, because people felt very burned about what happened in 2008, 2009. But it is, in terms of the bigger pot, which is at largely the discretion of the administration, we insisted that there be a oversight on that, and that was in our House bill and in the Senate bill. And it said that for the funds that would be released in that process, that there would be an inspector general to have oversight over that process, and in addition to that, a 5-person panel of that Congress appoints to oversee how that money goes out as well. This is absolutely essential. It could not be, for example, with all due respect to the secretary, he could put out money, we wouldn't even know about it until 6 months later, who may have gotten it, whether it was appropriate in terms of the priority it should have at this time where the lives and livelihood of the American people are at stake. There are different regional points of view about that, and just the role of government points of view. But we want again, we don't want to keep any resources from anybody who really needs it in order to, again, help our economy grow at this time. But it really has to be coronavirus specific. That has been our condition from day one. This is our third bill. Our first bill was about emergency. Our second bill was about emergency. Our third bill, which is this bill, is about mitigation, trying to mitigate for the damage that is being done to our economy, as well as continue to meet the emergency health needs of the American people. Our next bills will lean toward recovery, how we can create good-paying jobs as we go forward, perhaps building the infrastructure of America. All of these things are being done in a bipartisan way, but we do have to weigh in to make sure the leverage is more equal rather than favoring trickle down rather than bubble up from the workers.
Right. We are speaking, of course, with the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. Let's talk about that next bill that you referred to, whenever it may come. What sorts of things are you looking at? For example, I've talked to some people on the Hill who say this is a time for infrastructure. That may be part of the recovery you referred to. Are you starting to think about what sorts of things would help with that recovery?
Well, we still have a little bit of unfinished business from the two previous bills. For example, in the first bill, we said testing, 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 free testing for everyone, and then next bill, masks, masks, masks to facilitate that. However, what we want to do, and has not been provided for yet in the two bills, is to make sure that the funds that are required to cover the cost of testing. It's not just the test, it's the doctor visit and the rest, and we don't want anyone to be getting a high deductible because they were responsible in responding to the requirement that they be tested for those who are required to be tested. In addition to that, family medical leave is not as inclusive as it needs to be to cover the needs of America's working families. In terms of what we do want to see more direct payments, we had much higher direct payments in both our House bill, and we would hope to see that we can do that again because that is really very necessary. Another thing, there's just some other things that relate to pensions. We had a pension provision in the bill that President Trump supported, but Senator McConnell wouldn't do and said we'll do it in the next bill because the pension security of America's working families is essential to the strength of our economy, and now with the siege of the coronavirus, even more so. Then there's one that is very particular to the District of Columbia. For some reason, the Republicans in the Senate decided that they would not treat the district as a state, as has always been in the distribution of resources, but treat them as a territory. And it is at the great disadvantage of the District of Columbia and a cause of great concern for the members of Congress, House, and Senate from this region, to name a few. But again, to move on to the infrastructure, we're already, and again, that has never been partisan. That has always been a bipartisan initiative to build the infrastructure of America. It's a public health issue for clean air, clean water. It's a commercial, it's a business issue. It's an economic issue to move commerce and grow jobs and all the rest. And the list goes on. You know how important it is.
So maybe some infrastructure coming up?
Well, I would hope so. Our next bill may be just a very important piece that I didn't mention is state and local government is going to need much, much more infusion of cash. They're just not going to be able to meet the needs. My state of California had a big surplus, but we're spending it off. Our governor, Gavin Newsom, is spectacular and very, shall we say, careful in spending. But again, this is a challenge beyond anything we've ever seen before. Same thing with Governor Cuomo in New York, but other states as well. This is like, as I say, something we haven't seen before, so we have to be prepared. I would hope that some of that funding could come from the Fed in expanded lending opportunities, and we did allow for that in the legislation that was passed last night in the Senate, and that we will pass enthusiastically in bipartisan way on Friday morning after giving 24 hours notice to our members to show up in Washington.